Okay, so starting off really quickly, we have Joe Kent. He's running for Congress. You have an amazing past behind you. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, how are you?
Much better now that people can hear me.
Yeah.
This has been an insane start. So I'm going to probably jump all over the place with you on that. And this might be probably a pedestrian question, but a lot of people really want to know what are the differences between the special forces type units. And when I say special forces, I'm including the SEALs, etc. It's kind of rolling it all together. How would you describe their missions?
Yeah, I get that. I get that a lot. So it's a pretty common question. So you hear special forces used quite a bit. If you're being technical, special forces is very specific in the military. It's just the Green Berets. So special operations is the umbrella. So I started out in Ranger Regiment. Um, there's I think the best way to categorize it nowadays is there's kind of two categories. There's the guys that are more generalists in special operations, and they can do most special operations missions like direct action, special reconnaissance, and then to include some working with indigenous forces. So kind of the counterinsurgency thing, working with Iraqis and Afghans. So that's something that Green Berets primarily just did. Green Berets are still very specially trained at unconventional warfare, working with foreign forces. They get a language. They're supposed to have cultural knowledge. The groups are regionally oriented to give the guys some longevity and expertise. But because of the demands of the global war on terror, that skill set was so in need. The SEALs actually branched into that a good deal as well. And then when the Marines created Marine Special Operators, MARSOC, as they're commonly known, Marine Special Operations Command, they developed a very similar selection and training pipeline to that of Green Berets, because we, throughout the war on terror, we needed guys that could go in, do special operations missions, but also work with host nation forces. So it's still very much, I'm a Green Beret, so I got some pride, but it's still very much a Green Beret mission, but SEALs and MARSOC do it as well. And then you move into your more specialized raiding forces, your direct action oriented guys, what you think of when you think of a commando raid, Zero Dark 30.
Mhm.
Then you have the Rangers, the 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 Ranger battalions that specialize in that. And then you have your Delta forces and your SEAL Team 6. So those are the guys that are just supposed to go in and strategically and surgically take out the enemy. So those are the guys that are, kind of out every night chasing down bad guys throughout the world. So that's kind of the way easiest way to describe it, if that makes any sense.
Okay, and I had a SEAL on who was, I think, SEAL Team 3. I can't remember, and he was saying that Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 are kind of counterparts. They're like
Yeah.
sort of like a promotion, I guess, from the lower or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very specialized mission that they do to go after high value terrorists, but then also to do hostage rescue if called upon. So that just takes such a high degree of skill to do that and to do it well that we've kind of carved off these two specific units to go do just that. They have their roots in the Iran hostage crisis of the late 70s, early 80s, because we needed guys that could go in, liberate an embassy, and literally free Americans from the being held captive. So discretionary shooting and that type of stuff. So that's supposed to be their bread and butter. That's why they're so elite and set to the side for that mission. And the Rangers complement them to be kind of their brute force and just to add some firepower. But the Rangers have kind of come into their own in the global war on terror just out of necessity. So the Rangers are, I'd say, probably it's probably one of the most battle hardened units in the military right now.
Interesting. Now, I was looking up an interview, and Tim Kennedy was talking about special forces with Jocko Willink. I guess it was
Yeah.
like a comparison. Somebody asked, like, why are special forces so much better than SEALs? Obviously, to poke at Jocko, but
Yeah.
he described special forces as being a force multiplier,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
that is your specialty. Now, is that in the sense of you're small, but you're getting all the locals around you to turn that into a bigger force, or am I misinterpreting?
No, that's exactly right. So Green Berets are trying to go behind enemy lines and then work with locals on the ground that are either looking to overthrow an oppressive government or a terrorist organization like ISIS, and give them the skills and the training, and then really the direction they need to effectively conduct that mission. So the Green Berets themselves are force multipliers because as a very young Green Beret, you'll be put in charge of 30 or 40 guys who don't speak the same language as you, and you'll give them guns, which is always exciting, and you'll give them some training, and then you will give them guidance as to where to go and how to conduct their missions and their operations. You'll go with them to be part of that as well. And then something that's really unique about special forces, kind of where I found my niche in the military, is SF teams collect and analyze and action their own intelligence. That's pretty unique in terms of special operations forces, because it's all homegrown in the special forces community. So that's something that I think kind of sets us apart as well.
You just said something really interesting, and it makes me wonder, how do you know when you're given these locals that you've recruited the guns that they're not going to shoot you tomorrow?
Well, I mean, that does happen tragically. I'm laughing, gallows humor. But
Yeah.
in general, we do vetting, and usually we need to know that culture enough to know that this group, whatever group they're from, whoever they're going up against, that we are their best bet. So even though they may not necessarily believe in America and freedom and democracy and apple pie and women's rights and all the stuff that we hold dear, that they know that working with Uncle Sam is essentially in their best interest, because we're their best chance of survival. We obviously always hope that these are going to be people that we share values with, but that's not always the case when it comes to the cold hard reality of foreign policy. So usually it's one of those things where they end up valuing you more, if that makes any sense. So you're worth more alive than dead.
Okay, well, and I am genuinely curious about it, because I think of like Vietnam and
Mhm.
a lot of butter bars that were executed by
Yeah, I
friendly
mean,
fire, and those were in the same country. You're kind
yep.
of in I would think of a pretty precarious situation, if you will, having to deal with the locals. Now, I have a lot of body language experts, things like that on. Do you study body language or anything like that to ascertain whether you are in danger or whether somebody is trustworthy or whom you should watch out for?
Absolutely. So the Green Beret training that we go through is pretty intensive as far as cultural immersion, and then language training, but then also a lot of body language training. We do a good deal of scenario work in our culmination exercise. This field problem that's called Robin Sage. And so you essentially go into rural North Carolina, and you have to start your own militia essentially to overthrow a fictitious government. But it's happening all live play. You're off a base, you're having to go and work with people that weren't in the military before, win over rapport. Some of them are inserted that are supposed to be, they're supposed to double cross you, or just looking to, get your money. So there's lots of scenarios in there. There's a good deal of body language training, and then making guys think on their feet, and then really just kind of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, being able to make the best worst decision essentially in places where there's just no right or wrong answer. So we look for a lot of emotional intelligence in that type of training, because that's pretty much every day of being a Green Beret overseas. You're making 1,001 little decisions every day that could be life or death, and then also could affect U.S. foreign policy. So it's definitely a thinking man's game.
And also, do you have to work on influence? So not only being able to read, but also to project, because you have to project, power or security or safety
That's
or
right.
kindness or any element at any time to make them not want to betray you.
Yeah, it's a fine line. So you have to figure out your own personal style, because if you're not authentic, it'll kind of come across, and they won't trust you. But you have to walk that line between being someone who they fear just a little bit because you're a big bad barrel chested Green Beret who looks like he's ready to go get into a fight with everybody. Put that in the forefront of their head, but then also not come across overbearing and egotistical, that they see you as a threat or they see you as being disrespectful. So it's something that you learn through repetition. The training does a great job of setting up for that, because we have a bunch of older gentlemen who've been through these situations before. So some of the guys that trained my generation of Green Berets were some of the guys that were working with the the Afghan Mujahideen back in the 80s. We had some Vietnam veterans who were doing stuff in Cambodia and Laos, working with the Montagnard tribesmen. So they just had so much experience, and then they would go and they'd play these roles for us, where we'd have to go and convince them to, help us do our mission and build enough rapport and respect with them. So it's you get a good deal of training for it, but nothing really prepares you for it like your first time, when it's just like you and maybe one other American, and again, a bunch of 30 or 40 guys you're going to give guns to and go fight the enemy.
Okay, without obviously getting into details, have you ever been caught out in terms of you have a lot of people depending on you on the ground, but then leadership doesn't necessarily come through for you, or something happens not according to plan, and you're caught in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm very lucky. I'm sitting here right now with all my body intact and all that. So it obviously wasn't that bad. But I've been in situations that just the war itself was moving so fast that my team was given a mission, and it was kind of like, hey guys, we know that this probably isn't the best case scenario, but this is what you get to wear a special green hat for, and you get paid a little bit extra money for. So go make it happen, and trust your training, and best of luck. Which is what you sign up for. So I never felt like I was abandoned, or got a raw deal or any of that type of stuff. But yeah, you definitely will be pushed to the outer limit of your training. And then just me being in the military, the time I was in, I was in just before 9/11 and then for 9/11. So I was kind of there for the height of the GWAT, or the global war on terror. So some of the early days in Iraq, I was kind of like looking around like, I can't believe they're letting me do this. Like, I never in my wildest dreams pre 9/11 would have thought that this stuff would happen. I mean that in a good way. Like,
Well, you were in Ranger training during 9/11, correct?
I was in Special Forces selection, so I spent my first
Special.
3 years in Ranger Regiment, but then I was in the initial month-long selection you do, to see if they run that to see if you're actually going to be qualified to go to or successful enough to go to the qualification course, which is another year.
Okay. So now you went in with the intent of being a Green Beret from the get-go, from what I understand.
I did, yes.
Did it meet up with your expectations, and how was it compared to your time as an Airborne Ranger?
So my time in the military and then my time in Special Forces far exceeded my wildest dreams when I enlisted in the military, because 9/11 hadn't happened yet. So I was attracted to the Green Berets in particular. I wanted to do something commando-esque. I just didn't really know exactly which one I wanted to do as I was growing up. But looking at the mission of the Green Berets and the fact that even in peacetime, Green Berets were deployed throughout the world, working with local militaries, I thought, okay, the best chance for some action or to have some crazy adventures is going to be as a Green Beret, because they're always kind of supposed to be all over the world. I never thought in a million years I'd get to do the stuff that I got to do. It's hard for me to compare it to Ranger Regiment because the two missions are so different. Ranger Regiment is 100% the best place to start out in the military because it's a regiment. It's very disciplined. They take being able to shoot, move, and communicate very seriously. So some of the skills that I received as a young soldier in Ranger Regiment, I know kept me alive on the battlefield later on when I actually went to war. And like I said, I was in Special Forces selection for 9/11. So I was a peacetime Ranger guy. I did a lot of combat as a Green Beret and some other places, but then I never went to war as a Ranger. So it was interesting to see the dichotomy between the peacetime Ranger Regiment and then later on watching Ranger Regiment come into its own kind of as an outsider. So it's hard. It's just two very different missions. But people ask me that all the time. What's the difference between Rangers and SF? And I'm like, man, it's they're on two different planets. They can work together and they can coexist, but it's two very different missions.
Okay, it sounds almost like there's an espionage angle with the Special Forces side versus the Ranger. Like the Ranger may be more direct action oriented.
Sure.
Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, so Special Forces, whatever you want to call it, we have to collect our own intelligence. I mean, you're out there living amongst the locals. And so usually, I mean, nowadays with satellite connectivity and all that, it's easier to get information to guys on the ground, but we're designed to operate by ourselves. So it's up to us really to know what the overall commander's end state, the overall objective of the U.S. government in that area is, but then to train our own forces, collect our own intelligence. So usually that's just working with locals, because the people on the ground know the situation the best, being able to map out who the people of influence are, and then kind of work from there to figure out how those people are going to point you at the right places to direct your forces, whether that's a kinetic strike like a raid or some sort of sabotage, or if that's really just doing like an influence campaign where you put out a certain message, or you pay off the radio station to put out a certain message, that type of stuff. So yeah, it's there's a lot more, what most people would think are kind of classic intelligence activities that go into being a successful Green Beret.
Okay, and then after that, you became a CIA agent, and I imagine you had some interactions with CIA in the Middle East as well. I've had five different CIA officers on, and there's different wings of CIA. So first off, which part of the CIA were you, or can you go into?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't in the CIA for very long. I left right after my wife lost her life. So I was a paramilitary operations officer.
Okay. Now, is it because of the death of your wife that you left the CIA, or did you already have issues with the CIA in general?
No, I intended to stay in the CIA for another, 19 years or so. And then my wife was going to come over as well. But yeah, I was, after my wife was killed, I stepped away from that to take care of our kids and kind of slow life down a little bit.
Okay, and I'm asking too because you're running as a Republican, fairly conservative, definitely
Yep.
in the Trump side, MAGA,
Mhm.
I'd say.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily popular CIA with that group.
It's as I'm learning. Yes, you're right.
And that's why I definitely want to talk about it, because I mean
Sure.
that's the first pushback I got. Everything else is essentially, oh great, it's CIA, and I would say a lot of this goes to one guy, John Brennan,
That's right.
quite a
Yep.
lot.
Yep.
But what have you found there? Because I've had multiple CIA officers, again, the vast majority very left wing.
Yeah. So it's very similar to the military in the sense that the vast majority of CIA officers, whether they're operations officers out running sources, or they're analysts back home analyzing the intelligence the operations officers pick up, or some other function in the CIA, they're patriotic Americans that are willing to give their lives for this country. They serve in the shadows. It's highly competitive to get into the CIA. My path as a paramilitary guy was a little bit different than your average CIA guy, but it's very common for guys from special operations to go into to paramilitary. There's a very clear cut path there. But look, the problem is, and it's the same problem we have in the military. You can see it right now with the way this extremist stand down and all the woke virtue signaling from the military brass is getting pushed out. And the CIA is obviously part of that too with their recruitment video. But
Yeah,
the
we got to go into
leadership,
that.
yeah, but the leadership, starting with guys like Brennan, and probably even before Brennan, he was kind of a product of his environment. There's a very motivated political class at the upper leadership levels, and that's either people that have gotten inserted into the CIA. I think the FBI is the same way too. I'm not an FBI guy though, so I don't know. But I think a lot of these agencies are the same way. It's either someone who has known for quite a while that they want to go on this political path, so they've forsaken doing the core job, what the taxpayers pay them for, collecting, analyzing intelligence in the case of the CIA, and they've gone about making these political connections to get these positions of power. And they do that by cozying up with whoever's in power. And if you're a DC guy and you want to have longevity and you want to be successful, the safest bet is for you to be left leaning. In the Trump era, it was better to be far left leaning. But in general, if you want to have longevity in DC, lean to the left. Because even if a Republican comes in, there's more left leaning think tanks, there's more left leaning jobs in the military industrial complex that's all around DC. You just have more stability and longevity. It's the easiest way to stay non-controversial because you can just sort of support the left's party line, and there's a media incentive there as well. The media is never really going to come after you. So Brennan and his ilk, James Comey and those guys, they really made this political class of 3-letter agency political operatives who would continue to get promoted and continue to get power if they weaponized intelligence for one side. You don't see that with the conservatives, because I think, just like American life, a lot of the conservatives in the CIA, FBI, and the military, they've got their nose to the grindstone, and they're doing the job that the taxpayers are paying them to do. So we just have to get the politics out of these organizations. So the political appointee process, I think, is very broken. This is where we need more people who have a military background, a law enforcement background, or an intelligence background to come into places like Congress and help provide some oversight, because I don't think your average person really knows a lot of the nuances of these jobs, and they kind of can get steamrolled a little bit by a military guy with an impressive rank like general, or a CIA guy who's coming in talking some spooky language about intel that he really can't tell them all about because it's intel. So that was a long-winded answer, but I do understand some of the frustration.
No, I appreciate that. And actually, on the good note of that, I'm going to get some audience questions here. Hi, Joe, and thank you for your service, past and present. What training at the farm surprised you the most that you didn't expect to receive, and what training do you wish you had more of?
So at the farm, you're going to end up writing a heck of a lot more than you ever thought you would in your entire life. So there's a lot of the cool, spooky stuff in there that you see, driving around in cars doing neat things, or doing some form of tradecraft or whatever. But James Bond never writes a report in any of his movies. So you become a very proficient writer, or you just straight up don't pass. So like I said, it was pretty selective to get into the CIA. So if you're a guy like me and you're a little bit older when you go to the farm and kind of set in your ways, it's actually kind of challenging, because you're not coming right out of college like a lot of the younger, more traditional employees are. And so they're finely tuned writing machines. You get guys like me that have been doing military writing, or had been just being an adult for a while, and you end up getting a big education on sitting behind a keyboard and a computer for a really long time. So I probably just talked like 100 people out of ever applying. You get to do cool stuff too, but
well, they have ads that are making up for that, right?
They do. I don't know. Yeah, that's yeah.
I mean, okay. In fairness, a couple questions on that. We'll get to the ad, but you were from the paramilitary side.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any kind of tension between the paramilitary side and, shall we say, the intelligence side at all? I know the one person I know of who I would say is definitely right wing in the CIA was he worked security and paramilitary, whatever. I don't remember the exact role, but he guarded embassies and was in that leg, which I think is similar to you, correct or no?
A little bit. So the paramilitary wing is very similar to the core mission of the Green Berets. It's just a different set of authorities. So traditional military activities are Title 10, places that we actually have open hostilities, typically open hostilities, or there's an authorization use of military force. And then places that we don't, there's covert action, U.S. Code Section 50, Title 50. And that's kind of what paramilitary guys do. And so they're doing the hard work of working with countries that we're partnered with, or again back to groups that are going against repressive regimes or terrorist organizations. It's just in a blessed off covert action finding by the president, as opposed to a military action. So being a Green Beret and being a paramilitary operations officer are pretty similar. Paramilitary operations officers, though, that you do have to go to the farm and become a certified case officer. So you have to be proficient at collecting intelligence and then reporting it as well. So I wouldn't say, because the mission of the agency is so closely compartmentalized, even inside the building internally, you get little factions here and there, but that's just human nature. We have it in the military too, in special operations, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing and they're highly competitive about it. Again, I didn't see a lot of, when people were all working together, like the paramilitary guys, the operations guys, the intelligence analysts, the logistics guys, one team, one fight in general. Personality conflicts here and there, because that's human nature. But when you go back to headquarters, you would get some people that were way more concerned about Beltway, ins and outs of the Beltway and the political circuit. And that can be very, very frustrating. I mean, but I saw the same thing in the military as well. And again, if you want to be a successful DC survivor, you want to sit a little bit to the left. And then in the Trump era, the incentive was to go further to the left because Trump wanted to make some pretty bold changes. And I think there was some people who were ideologically very much against that. But I think the vast majority of the mid-level bureaucrats that slow rolled him and just didn't want to do that, they didn't want to take risk. The easiest thing to do in the government is status quo. When you get somebody that
Mhm.
comes in and was like, we're not doing that, we're going to do something completely different, you've just alienated a lot of people whose idea was the status quo. But then the vast majority of people that actually have to go out and execute that, they're like, well, now I'm taking risk. Now I have to do something. And they
Mhm.
don't like that. So that's the friction I saw was mostly between the people who were charged with being on the ground in danger and the people that were back in DC worried about the Beltway and what political party was in power.
Yeah, and I I kind of wonder about that. And there's a good corruption question coming up later too. I'm going to jump on this question, which is kind of off topic, but it's going to go away. That's one of the problems with the streaming. Dark Sage, and cover your face, but essentially, the individual is concerned about older voters being ignored or trampled over in order to appeal to a younger generation. And the CIA commercials kind of lend to some of that too. Um, are you concerned about that? And what do you, how do you reach out to all constituents?
Yeah, the big thing I think that we need to articulate to people is that the conservative movement, the Trump movement, the America First movement, we want to bring back working class jobs, middle class jobs, and our way of life. So everything that the corporate elites and the far left has been doing for the last several decades was shipping our jobs overseas, killing off our ability to have people graduate high school and then be able to make enough money to support a family. All
Mhm.
the manufacturing jobs have been mostly killed off and shipped overseas. Like I'm in the middle of timber country in my district. The EPA and the federal government have absolutely gutted and destroyed the timber industry. But then the lie that we told people, younger people at the time, my generation and a little bit younger, is hey, those jobs are gone. They're not coming back. But here's the deal. If you go to college, even if you have to take on a bunch of debt, if you go to college, there's going to be these great jobs waiting for you. And then what the corporate sector did, because all they care about is their bottom line, what the political class did was because all they care about is their bottom line, is they allowed legal immigration in the form of H-1B visas, L-1 visas to come in and completely either take away those jobs here in the States with legal immigration, or they ship those jobs overseas as well. So now you have a whole generation that doesn't have access to any means to provide a great family for themselves, to buy a house, to have kids, that type of thing. That type of thing. So if they do have kids, then they need to have two people working, and then you have this huge, massive issue of childcare. So what I want to articulate to everyone is, regardless of your age, we want to bring back the working in the middle class. We want Americans to have the same America that I grew up in, that you grew up in. We want to offer that again to the American people. That starts with the economy, but then also the culture. The left has been going after our culture. They've been attacking, the family unit for decades now via
Mhm.
the education system, via the university system, and via the media to really undermine our traditional way of life. And I think we just need to fully embrace traditional American values. I mean, am I don't really care how people conduct themselves behind closed doors as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. But the core, the backbone of this country is the family unit. We can't deny that, and that's something that I think we need to absolutely just be unashamed about. And I think that's something that appeals to not just an older generation, but
Mhm.
I think my generation and even the younger guys. We know that, like, hey, what jobs are we supposed to get? How are we supposed to start families? How are we supposed to buy houses? So I think that's my message.
Okay, and that's a good message. And is it beyond hope now? I know that in your area, I believe Arizona had it too. I mean, you have things like the spotted owl, which shuts down all kinds of industry, and it would be like, oh, this rare species or something happens, and it can be crippling to the economy. I'm from Arizona. We had
Yeah.
some of that type of thing too. Is it too late? How do you propose turning that around to
So
get
yeah,
those
I
jobs?
mean, it's not too late. I mean, the biggest lie that we've been sold for generations. Again, this didn't start with Obama. This is both
Mhm.
sides of the aisle decided, decades ago that shipping off American jobs overseas was in our best interest. Different schools of thought justified it in different ways, but that was the overall theme. That's been proven to be an absolute lie. So to say that we can't bring these jobs back is just accepting defeat. And I refuse to accept defeat. And it's also a national security issue because now in America, we don't produce anything anymore. This modern monetary theory says that we can just continue adding zeros to the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, sending out money to people. And that, by injecting that much cash in the economy, is going to jumpstart and keep our economy going. So we're running off of debt, and we rely on the Chinese, the Gulf Emirates to buy our debt bonds. But if you're them, even if you didn't want to take us down, which the Chinese do, and we just given them a vulnerability to do it, why would you buy our debt? Buying our debt is betting on the United States of America to continue to be successful. When a country stops producing things, how can they reasonably expect to continue to be successful? So to me, our debt and our lack of production, our lack of timber, our lack of energy, our lack of steel, coal, all that right there is a national security threat. So I propose to make this a national emergency and for us to crack down heavily on any company that ships their manufacturing overseas. We give them heavy financial incentives, tax breaks to bring back those jobs. Except we, the government, will get a say in where a lot of those manufacturing places, those plants get put in places that have natural resources economies, like my district with the timber industry. We need to just go about deregulating that as much as we possibly can. The EPA's wreaked havoc. The spotted owl issue was nothing but a ruse to kill off the timber industry under the guise of, we're going to protect the environment. That's proven not to be the case. The spotted owls are dying off anyways because there's another species of owl that hunts them, nature and all. But then also the federal government out here controls way too much of the land. We need to open that up to the private sector, but monitor the private sector to ensure that they are going to create jobs responsibly, create an environment for them to create jobs. And then also we need to bring in protectionist trade policies. Like there's no reason why we're importing timber right now from Canada. We're just not using our timber, but we're importing timber. Same thing goes pretty much with oil. We're pumping oil up in Alaska, and then we're shipping it to China to be refined to ship it back to the West Coast. Absolutely ridiculous. We should be refining all that here. So I think the debt that we're in, our lack of production is a national security issue. We need to treat it like a 9/11 essentially, and have a surge of U.S. production back in this country. So it's not going to be easy. I don't have hey, there's one simple thing we need to do. It's not it. We're going to have to take major restructuring of the way our economy works right now. Trump was heading down that path, and that's why he was getting so much friction. And that's why we saw working class jobs rise between 2017 and 2020, right before COVID happened, when economists for decades have been telling us that is just impossible. Those jobs are never coming back. Those wages won't rise. So making it an emergency and making it a priority is the plan.
You brought up something, and I've got a question here about both sides being together on shipping jobs out and everything else, and the collusion causing problems. Kevin here brought up a good point about your area and in Washington. Homelessness is a giant issue. And that goes all the way back to Reagan and prior, where the left and the right both agreed. You had the left saying everybody should be free. You shouldn't just lock people up. They have choices, blah, blah, blah. And the right said, oh, good, we won't have to pay for it. So they shut down the state facilities. And a lot of the homeless we have now, it all goes back to that. It has been compounded over time. Yep. I'm curious your thoughts on that, because a typical conservative is one who would say, hey, we less government, less care. But do we have a responsibility to take care of those who need medical help, especially mental health?
We certainly do. So, the homeless issue is complicated, but a lot of it goes back down to there being lawlessness and us, especially here on the West Coast, between Portland is directly to our south, Seattle and Olympia are to our north. These are sanctuary cities that everybody's been watching the news for the last year and a half. They've seen those cities devolve in absolute anarchy. That's because law and order in those cities broke down years and years ago. And so then homeless people were heavily incentivized to come into these cities because of the social programs that really weren't addressing any of the mental health or the drug addiction issues. They were essentially just saying, hey, you can come here and we will take care of you with, a place to stay, with food, with substance, but at the same time also enabling their drug habits, enabling the drivers of the homelessness in the first place. And look, at this point, we just got to call a spade a spade. The far left has absolutely benefited from having all these homeless encampments throughout the Pacific Northwest because they are very easy to mobilize when you want anarchy to happen. So if you're an Antifa planner, you're a BLM planner, and you want some manpower for your riots, there is entire homeless camps all along the sides of I-5 that you can go recruit from. And they've been doing it now successfully for, about a year and a half. So there's no incentive for the left to clean up this problem right now because they can mobilize these essential proxy armies at a moment's notice. But you're right. It goes back to mental health and the drug problems. Oregon, just to our south, just legalized all recreational drugs for personal use. Washington State just passed a law that said you have to be knowingly in possession of drugs. And so by changing that one word, now anyone can just say, hey, man, I didn't know that the drugs were on me. So we have essentially de facto legalized drugs in Washington State too. So we're not addressing any of those issues, but there's also this massive industry that's been built around how many homeless people are in each of these cities. So there's a massive federal government problem. I would get the federal government out of it. This is where I'm traditional conservative, and I would give as much grant money as I could to clean up the drug problems, the crime problems, and just the general lawlessness to the localist level as possible. Unfortunately, some of the mayors in these cities, like Ted Wheeler to our south, and then the mayor in Seattle, they refuse to deal with it for all the same reasons Joe Biden refuses to deal with it, because they benefit from a lot of this chaos. So I would rely on sheriffs. Like, we have some great constitutional sheriffs here in the 3rd Congressional District that would actually enforce the law. I would put the funds in their hands. There's no reason why activist mayors, activist governors like we have in the Northwest should get a penny from federal law enforcement grants, because they've just proven that they will not act in good faith. They will not address any of these issues. They'll let their cities burn. They'll let their people suffer. So put it in the hands of sheriffs and police departments who actually are committed to cleaning up their streets and keeping their people safe, I think, is key.
Now, there's a difference, though, between the sheriffs and the police. I have
Right.
Dr. Wood, who's spoken about before. The sheriffs being slightly better because they're elected.
Yep. That's right. So the sheriffs have to perform. That's because they're elected by the people. And that's why you've seen in my district in particular, we have Sheriff Snaza, we have Sheriff Songer, Sheriff Brown, a bunch of sheriffs that have stood up and they've said that they would not enforce some of these crazy COVID lockdowns to let people continue to have their businesses, their places of worship, and their schools open, letting free Americans make their own choices against the governor's king-like it dictates. And then they've also made Second Amendment sanctuaries to keep the right to keep and bear arms sacred in their districts. So I want to be able to, from the federal perspective, reward sheriffs like that are boldly stepping up and enforcing the Constitution, because they know they're accountable to the people. So we should be, as other public servants, we should be enabling them as much as possible, and then cutting off the bad actors.
Okay, and speak of the devil, and he appears. Dr. Wood happens to be here. Most of the cities like Baltimore that implement Democrat policies throw more money at policing and schools than anyone else, despite inversely correlated results. And I don't know that Baltimore and Seattle are that different anymore.
Nope. No, they're not. I mean, they're massive money pits. The people that live in Seattle, our taxes here in Washington are pretty beefy as well. And then the city taxes in Seattle are very high as well. So, I mean, they're obviously not getting the return on the investment. The money is going somewhere. And it's just this industry that's absolutely designed to enable these systemic problems. I mean, Baltimore, Baltimore is a classic example, because those neighborhoods that are bad in Baltimore, they've been bad for decades. It's relatively new in Seattle. The last, I'd say, decade, especially the last 5 years, a lot of that's been drastically accelerated, but they continue to throw money into these problems that just don't address the root cause. And that's because you just don't have serious people that are actually in charge of those areas.
Okay, now this is where it's going to get go back and forth on different points. I have a locals page, unstructured.locals.com. Everybody, please check it out. So I've got a lot of questions coming in from there. Here's a 3-pack, though. How do you feel Washington is receptive to the America First agenda?
So Washington, up here in the Pacific Northwest, we get a bad rep because people just see Seattle and they just see Portland. You get outside those districts, and again, you're in timber and manufacturing, country. You're in traditional America. So it's very red. Trump did very well in the 3rd Congressional District. And hey, for people that are interested in what the far left has to offer, we can almost see it from our doorsteps in Portland. So watching Portland burn and some of it creep over into Vancouver across the Columbia, people know exactly what the far left is all about. So again, the America First movement's alive and well out here. They've also seen for the last couple of decades, like I mentioned, the timber industry get destroyed. We've seen a tech boom, but then those tech jobs slowly disappear thanks to legal immigration, but then thanks to further offshore. So we have seen the absolute worst of what the left and establishment Republicans have to offer, and that's frankly why Trump did so well out here, and that's why I think that we're going to continue to do well in Washington's 3rd Congressional District.
Okay. Are there any other Washington state, local, or federal representatives who are supporting you at this point?
Right now, because I'm going after a incumbent, they're kind of letting me fend for myself. I think some of that will change when I win the Trump endorsement at some point. However, yeah, for right now, it's kind of every man for himself. We're living in unprecedented times. There's never been this much of an appetite to go after incumbents as there is right now.
Okay. And I have a feeling you probably will get a Trump endorsement simply because the incumbent you're going after went after Trump. So,
Yeah.
and he's known to hold grudges for some reason. I don't know. Heard a rumor. But what made you decide to actually run? I mean, did you were planning to be in CIA forever, and that's just a mid-level government employee technically.
Yep.
What changed?
So it's a little bit of a long story. So the short answer is when Jamie Herrera Beutler cast her vote, I realized what that meant. When she voted for the impeachment of President Trump, look, I voted for Jamie Herrera Beutler. I supported Jamie Herrera Beutler. She wasn't always the best Republican, but I could kind of, justify it that it was either her or a far left Democrat. So when she did that, I don't think she realized that she made this entire district vulnerable to the far left. Because, like I've said, we're right in between failed Democrat-run cities. So that the signal then was that this district could be essentially manipulated and overran simply by a narrative. So I think that she made us entirely vulnerable. I've never been able to ask people to go and fight for me. So I said, hey, I can sit here and I can complain about it, or I can go do something about it. So that was my call to action. Putting me in the political realm goes back to my wife being killed in Syria. So my wife was killed about a month after President Trump tried to get our troops out of Syria in 2018. So she was killed in January of 19. So had Secretary of Defense Mattis and a bunch of other unelected bureaucrats not stabbed President Trump in the back, disobeyed the orders of a commander in chief, disobeyed the will of the American people, my wife and 3 other great Americans would be alive right now. So when I got the opportunity to actually meet President Trump, I knew what the establishment thinking was, that that the establishment wanted to paint Trump as this foreign policy novice or amateur that didn't know what he was doing. But based on my experience at that point, I had 20 years special operations, just started my CIA career. I knew what Trump was doing was spot on. I had almost 5 years on the ground in Iraq. I had been in Syria. I knew that battlefield very well. He was right. So when I actually had the chance to meet him when he came out to Dover, I had the opportunity to say, hey, look, you're getting it right. Like, you're not hearing that from anybody else, I think, at the senior levels, but us guys on the ground, we know you're getting it right and we appreciate what you're doing. Trump's an unconventional guy. From there, he was very interested, more interested than I thought he would be, and he put me in touch with folks in his orbit, and I kind of got a chance to do some advising. But then I also took it upon myself to start writing op-eds, going on the news, articulating why Trump's policy made sense. So that kind of put me on a political trajectory. And then seeing the way 2020 went down with the media's narrative about the election and how we had to just accept it, I knew I wanted to do something. I did not consider running for office, though, until Jamie Herrera Beutler did what she did. Because then for me, it was just like, well, someone has to go after her. And I'm not going to ask someone else to do it. I'm not going to wait for somebody else to do it. I have 2 young sons who lost their mother when they were very young. And someday I'm going to have to look them in the eyes and say that this is the country that your mother gave her life for. And the condition, the state that we're in right now, I can't do that. So I have to go do something to actively fix it.
Okay, would you mind sharing what exactly was Trump's policy? Because I don't know that it's necessarily widely known.
So basically, it was that our wars in the Middle East were largely a waste, and we needed to get out of them. The exception was when Trump came into office. I think a lot of people forget because he did such a good job of this. When Trump came into office, ISIS, a non-state terrorist organization, had taken over large swaths of Syria, large swaths of Iraq, large
Libya.
swaths of Libya, and they were pumping refugees and terrorists into Europe. And they were destabilizing the entire region. They were kidnapping Americans, sawing off their heads on TV. They were inspiring attacks into Europe. They wanted to inspire attacks into America. They held ground enough to give them the space to plot those. So Trump actually, as much as he knew the roots of our conflicts in the Middle East were largely due to our bungling and our hubris, that we had to go in and we had to crush ISIS. So he gave us the authority to go in and decisively beat ISIS. Obama couldn't do that for a wide variety of reasons. Obama lacked the will to allow the commanders on the ground to beat ISIS. Trump gave us that, got it done in about a year and a half, way faster than anyone thought it could be done. And then he did what no other president's done. He laid out a very clear military objective. We accomplished that military objective. And he said, now we're getting our guys out. We hadn't done that since 1991 in the Gulf War. So Trump attempted to do that. And that's when you saw the entire deep state say, whoa, whoa, you want to end a war? You can't end a war. This is, I mean, you got a guy like James Mattis. He's like, hey, man, this is what we do. We stay in these places forever. Let's build some bases. Let's get some contracts going. Let's get more troops over here. Let's build a government. That was their bread and butter. When Trump came in and said, we're not doing that, that's when you saw everything collapse. Another good way to, I think, articulate Trump's foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, is Iran. When Trump came in, the Iran deal was in full effect. The Iranians were flush with cash. They were sending their proxies all throughout the Middle East. They controlled the Iraqi government. They controlled Baghdad. They controlled parts of Syria that posed a threat to Israel. They controlled key ports in Yemen, which threatened key shipping lines, the Bab al-Mandeb, which is the gateway to the Suez Canal. And then they were messing around in Bahrain and the Gulf proper. They were messing around with their conventional navy in the Gulf. Trump ended the Iran deal, put on max pressure sanctions to cut them off because, hey, proxies and surrogates, they run off cash. When they don't have cash anymore, they can't be as active. Trump put the squeeze on them. The Iranians pushed back because they didn't believe any American would push back against them. Trump said, hey, I don't want to go to war with these guys. I'm not going to go to war over a drone getting shot down, over some guys getting their speedboats too close to our ships. However, if you kill an American, you will feel the pain. The Iranians didn't believe him. They killed an American contractor in Kirkuk. After that, Trump went about bombing members of Hezbollah. Then they marched on the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, and Trump did what no other president, what all the experts said was impossible to do. He killed Qasem Soleimani and he killed Abu Mahdi Mohandas. Qasem Soleimani was the legendary Iranian general who George Bush and who Barack Obama would not dare touch. I know this for a fact. When I was on the ground, we knew where Soleimani was. Soleimani didn't hide it. He would essentially taunt us. We would not mess with Quds Force officers because we didn't want to provoke Iran. We were scared of these guys. They had, even if you go back to the Carter administration, when the initial Iranian hostage ordeal happened, we had never struck back against Iran. They bombed our embassies in Beirut. They kidnapped and skinned alive a CIA station chief in Beirut in the 80s. We did nothing. So they thought that they could just get away with this. And Trump reset that in one night when he authorized the strike that killed Qasem Soleimani and then Abu Mahdi Mohandas, his deputy proxy master in Iraq, who also bombed the U.S. embassy in Kuwait back in the 80s. So, but he didn't get us into a new war. He took out, he stated the clear military objective, and he had a clear end state for it. So that's essentially Trump's foreign policy, I think, in the Middle East. More broadly speaking, he wanted America to have a strong economy so that we could project force through our economy and through our diplomacy abroad.
Okay, no, that's, and I do remember him killing that general, and that maybe it served the effect of cutting the head off of a snake.
Yep.
At least for a while.
That's right.
So, definitely. And David Freiheit actually had a question, and I think you might have kind of answered it by the way, but do you harbor any resentment to the government over losing your wife?
I do. To the permanent ruling political class, I do. I hold a lot of resentment towards them. I think the people that are in government for a career, they need to keep in mind that they support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Their allegiance isn't to a political party. It's not to them liking the guy in office or them not liking the guy in office. I went in the Army under Bill Clinton. I served under Barack Obama. I served under Bush, and I served under Trump. So the problem that we have is these career mid to senior level bureaucrats that were never elected to a damn thing. No one elected Jim Mattis to a damn thing. No one elected Brent McGurk from the State Department to a damn thing. They are you when you were there to serve and support and defend the Constitution and the commander in chief. And that's it. So when these people get their own little agendas, they want to start these wars and keep them going, and they know better than the American people. That's what I hold resentment against. And that's when I go to DC, I like to say I have the utmost respect for the Constitution of the United States of America, and I have the utmost disdain for our institutions, because our institutions, our ruling political class has done more damage to this country than any other force. The marriage between the corporate elites, the Wall Street elites, and the permanent political class has done more to this country than any of our enemies have ever done. If you look at all of our major crises that we've ever had, crash of the Wall Street, crash the housing market, leaving us in these wars that have cost us, $7-8 trillion on the backs of our children and grandchildren. Those are the people that are the true enemies of this country. And I mean that in a way that we need to absolutely purge that mentality from our system. We need service-oriented people in our government, not people that look down their nose at the American people and just say, well, I know better, even though no one ever elected them to anything. So I still do harbor resentment towards the permanent ruling political class.
Okay, some people that I specifically blame for this is Congress, very specifically.
Oh,
Where
absolutely.
you're running, I feel that Congress has abdicated the responsibility
Amen.
of war to the administrations.
Yes.
And as somebody running for Congress, can you commit to seizing back the constitutional congressional role that I feel has been left?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're 100% right. The reason why these wars have gone on for so long, the reason why there's been this marriage between corporate America, permanent ruling political class, is because Congress, by and large, has been absolutely derelict in their oversight duties. War is very, very clearly outlined in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. The power to authorize war, it rests with Congress, and so do the oversight duties, and so does approving the budget to run these wars. So Congress, as opposed to just giving every president a blank check for war, they need to exercise some discretion and say, hey, why are we invading Iraq? What does that have to do with the authorization and use of military force against Al Qaeda and terrorist organizations? Those questions weren't asked. Again, there was this marriage between permanent ruling political class, Joe Biden, the Bushes, the Cheneys, the Clintons, the same old actors. So Congress does need to get back in there, and this is where we need outsiders. But we need a team of outsiders and some people with some inside knowledge. Again, respect for the Constitution, disdain for the organizations. You have to know how the military ticks. You have to know how wars are fought. You have to know how intelligence is gathered to ask the hard questions. I mean, everything that's being done right now, I think, with the military, either staying at war or enforcing these insane policies as far as the domestic terror, the stand down against extremists, all these other things are being done because I think Congress doesn't understand how the military actually works. There's not enough veterans there asking pointed questions. Same thing with the intelligence community. The way that we've seen the FBI and the CIA weaponize intelligence for political means, a lot of that has to do with because you don't have people in Congress that can ask the right questions, that know actually how intelligence works. You get guys like Schiff that are like, well, I can't tell you what the intelligence is. We just need to run this Russian witch hunt for a year and a half, but I can never tell you fully what it is. Like, that's not how it works. Like, tell me exactly how it works. Tell me how you collected the intelligence, who analyzed it. Let's lay it all out there. So I think we do need Congress to stop approving so many omnibus bills that just are good deals for their district, that are transactions that run our debt up, but then to get hot on oversight, because our country is absolutely being run off the rails right now by the permanent ruling political class.
It goes beyond the military, though.
Yeah.
Why do we have a Department of Education? Why
Right.
do we
Yeah.
have all the other departments? Last
Yep.
time I checked, they fall under budgeting in Congress again.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we could be saving a lot of money on the federal perspective. Department of Education is a great example. Like, once again, go back to Article 1, Section 8. That's Congress's responsibility. like what is the Department of Education even doing at the federal level? I'm not saying education is not important. I'm just saying that should be pushed down to the states and to the cities and municipalities, not Congress. Washington D.C. is 3,000 miles away from Washington State. Why do they have anything to do with really anything in our daily lives other than negotiating trade, approving budgets, authorizing war, the stuff that's outlined in the Constitution? They need to get back to those basics.
Okay, I feel like all of these problems stem out of cowardice
Yes.
because a couple issues. One, why do you have a 2-year term in Congress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I support term limits. I do think the 2-year thing makes congressmen forever running for office and raising money. I mean, I think senators are too, to a certain extent, but if everything goes well and I win, I basically start my next reelection campaign because that's the mindset that you have to have. I'd be open to a discussion of like lengthening or just going with a 4-year standard. If we do it for the president, why wouldn't we do it for congressmen and senators? But we do need term limits. I don't think there was ever supposed to be professional politicians because after
That's
a
my
while, the politicians, they just become more part of DC and the Beltway than they are their own communities.
I believe the reason why the term is only 2 years is because it was a hardship.
Yeah. Yeah. They
People
just
were
want to
not
get going.
supposed to be a professional politician.
That's right.
They needed to get back home to take care of their business, take care of their farms, take care of
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep.
And they served their country, but it was kept only 2 years because, again, that
Yeah.
was a direct representation. Senate was appointed by the state.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah. We've deviated very far from that.
how do you propose to unwind this? As one
I think,
congressman in a very
yeah.
large body in Washington.
I mean, term limits. And the thing is, proposing term limits, but then also calling for roll call votes. There's so much that goes on in Congress, either in the dead of night at the last minute or that happens anonymously. I think our elected officials not being on record for every single vote is an absolute crime. We should always know exactly how our elected representatives are voting. So I think go in there and say, hey, I propose that we only have, a 4-year term or 2-year term, and everybody should only get to do, cumulative of 8 years, just like the president. Put that into a bill, and then everybody has to put their name on how they voted on that bill and go back and explain to their constituents how and why they voted that way, and why they're choosing to perpetuate this political ruling class. I think that would be a good first step.
Okay, now one of the questions that came in on locals, and it was actually from Dr. Wood as well, and it was fairly long, so I'll try to summarize it. In his experience, people go into a system that they don't know with the idea of changing it.
Right.
But over time, they get corrupted by said system. Good example. I don't know if Baltimore comes up. You've seen The Wire, possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, great show. Yep.
So you had the mayor who was a change agent who wound up becoming just as corrupted as everybody else once he gets in.
Yeah.
How do you propose fighting that? Because obviously you get elected, you need to get something done. You've got to work with people to get something done.
I think the times are changing. I think whether you like Donald Trump or you hate Donald Trump, he changed politics. He brought in this outsider perspective. And now I think on the right, the conservative America First movement, we're dying for authenticity and we're dying for people that are willing to make a change. So I think if any of us America First people go in there and we do the typical DC thing where they're like, well, guys, I had to compromise on absolutely everything. And, that's just the way business goes. No one's going to care about me or how charismatic they think I am, or if they think I have a compelling story. They're going to vote me out. Like, that's what's going to happen. I think that the America First movement right now is making it so that not one of us, not two of us, or three of us have to bear this whole thing alone. There's a huge movement. It's a grassroots movement. It's the same movement that President Trump tapped into that is sick of the same political status quo. So I feel very enabled going into that position because I know that I'm not going to be alone. I know that it will be a mandate from the people of this district, which is key. But then also I'm going to have other folks in there because I think the country's changing. I think politics are changing. I think this is where the left is very much behind because they opted for a guy like Joe Biden, who, is a 50-year He's the corrupt old credit card lobbyist senator from Delaware, like he's the most establishment thing ever. And that's still very much the lockstep that the left wants to move in. They radically stomp out all their change agents. The right, our change agent, Donald Trump, busted through all of our establishment, and the old establishment and the right's not coming back. America first is the future of the party, whether I get elected or not. It just is. And so I think it's not going to be the absolute. I'm not going to be a lone operator in this. I think I'm going to have the support from people in my district, and I think there's going to be support from quite a few other people in Congress, because America First taking over the GOP.
Okay, so the accountability be within your peers, a cohort.
Yeah, peers, and then also to the constituents, because people have so much access to information now. Mm-hmm. I just don't like Representative Jamie Herrera Beutler, the woman I'm primarying. She operates like it's 10, 15 years ago, that we're just not going to figure out how she votes, and that she can come back in and give us some generic platitudes, not meet with anybody, and then do some transactional deals where she's like, yeah, but I built a salmon run in this one place, or a fish hatchery. You guys still like me, right? I gave you something. People aren't that dumb. Like, I'm going to have to communicate with my constituents consistently. I'm going to have to be accountable. They're going to hold me accountable. And then I think the new face of the GOP is also going to hold me accountable. I just think things are changing.
How popular is she?
She is not very popular at all. People are furious. I mean, they tolerated her for a while. I mean, a lot of that's just people gave her a good deal of leeway because she had an R next to her name. But the way that she undermined a lot of President Trump's core policies, she voted with the Democrats to keep Obamacare in place. She voted to end the construction of the border wall. She just voted for a massive amnesty package for illegal immigrants. So she voted to keep our troops in Afghanistan with the whole Russian bounty thing they lied about last year. So she's guilty of many, many infractions against traditional conservative values and against the America First agenda. And then she wants to go and virtue signal and go along with the January 6th narrative that all Trump supporters are insurrectionists and there was this armed takeover of the Capitol. People see that for what it is. They see that she's trying to grab her 5 minutes of fame. So people are furious that she thinks that she can come and not explain herself or be accountable to her constituents. So people are mad. They're excited to get rid of her.
Okay. And as a last point, and this, I think, is going to become really important to you, social media, Section 230.
Yeah.
You have a sitting president who was actually taken off of social media, and you are associated with him.
Yep.
We also have a Congress and the Senate, which I kind of think is a kabuki theater and BS, where you have Ted Cruz. Yeah. He yells at them for a while. Everybody says, look, he yelled at Jack Dorsey, and nothing happens.
Yep.
So I'm on YouTube for now. Hopefully this video stays monetized. We'll find out. There's always a countdown. Every time I have a video, I go and I'll be pulling up here in a second and see if it's got the yellow dollar sign. Survey says, do I have a yellow dollar? Not yet. Okay, still monetized for the moment, but it's literally that show after show after show after show. One, how are you going to survive to keep your voice out there and be heard and not just be squashed? And two, when you get there, are you going to actually do something about the companies? And what would that be?
So for right now, while I'm just an America First guy on the internet trying to make my way, I have contingencies built in. That's what I'm doing. So I'm on every social media platform. We're still on the traditional ones, Twitter and Facebook, but we're also on Parler, Cloud Hub, Rumble, and all that, because we're anticipating, waking up my Twitter account's nuked, whatever. It is what it is. But when I get into office, we absolutely have to break up big tech. They're monopolies. Section 230 is like either just a start, or at this point, it's just an afterthought. Big tech has to be broken up. We need to treat the internet and access to technology like a public utility, because nowadays you can't really survive without some sort of an online presence. So that's a place where I depart from traditional, hey, never mess with the free market conservatives. This is a place where the government needs to come in. We broke up Standard Oil for much, much less than what big tech is doing right now. It's a First Amendment issue, but it's also just, can you live your life? I mean, there's only a handful of people in our society right now that can operate being completely removed from the internet in the way that Donald Trump was. You've got to be Donald Trump and be a multimillionaire to be like, well, whatever, they took away my Twitter, like, I'm good. The guy owns, he has other assets in other places. I've had fellow veteran friends that are on the conservative spectrum that have been completely taken off all social media. They've had their ability to hold a bank account to monetize their products they're selling. They've had that taken away, and so that's that right now. Like you said, you look at a little countdown clock. Like, if they decided that one day they're like, oh man, I don't like Eric, like, let's just delete him, they could do that, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's happened. Okay.
My channel literally on Valentine's Day, yes, there's an intercourse element joke in there, I know, was eliminated from YouTube. 100%. It was completely removed. I got it back off backups. It was a mistake, but it has actually happened to me personally.
Yeah. So, I mean, we just can't allow that to happen. This is where the government needs to come in and protect people's access to free commerce and access to free speech. So I think treating it like a public utility is the way to go. But really, like, we need to strip Google, Twitter, Facebook, Dorsey, Zuckerberg, all those guys of their power, especially if you look at the amount of influence they've had over elections, over how people think. I mean, look at just right now in Maricopa County with that audit they're doing, and they said to Dominion, hey, give us the administrator password. And you have Dominion, you have a tech company saying, no, you can't have the administrator password to adjudicate your presidential election. Like, that's some Twilight Zone peak technocrat right there. Like, the technocrats in the society are like, we don't really care about your democracy. You can't see behind this that you paid for. So it's something that's going to require a good deal of force from Congress to get done. And it's not going to be easy. It's not one step. I think people like Section 230 because you can point at, you're like, hey, Section 230, the publisher issue, if we get rid of that, everything's going to be fine. Like, no, that's not. It's going to be hard.
Section 230.
It's going to be a fight.
Problem. We actually need it. It has to be reformed.
Exactly.
Otherwise, if you say they're all publishers, then they can just shut anything they want down.
Right.
And they'll have to survive. So, yeah, I agree with you on the utility aspect of it. Or Dershowitz says the cab principle, like, you don't care who rides, just whoever comes up.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
But well, fantastic. And where can people find you and donate money and all that good stuff?
Yeah, they can go to joekentforcongress.com. So joekentforcongress.com. There's a bunch of media on there. I have all my media hits. We'll put this link on there. All my stances to the various issues are on there. And if people can, I'd really appreciate a donation. So up against an incumbent with a huge war chest, and then I'll be up against the far left Democrat after the primary. I'm trying to make it all happen right now with individual contributions. I put up over $200,000 of my own money to show my commitment to this, because I'm not going to ask anyone for money before I put up my own assets to show my skin in the game. So I thoroughly believe in what the founding fathers said about pledging their lives, their sacred honor, and their fortunes to this cause. So joekentforcongress.com, anything they can donate really helps me take this seat back and restore the will of the people of DC.
Awesome. And somebody asked, do you have a brother named Clark?
We might be the same guy. I really can't say that.
There you go. Hey, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.